So do you have any things you like to see and don't like to see in debates? We should maybe know about?
For the most part, just make best argument you can. I will be flowing it, so, and I'll be nudging on the flow. In the event that no arguments are dropped and that sort of thing, it'll just be the most compelling argument. If you want to speak fast or spread, you're welcome to, but make sure you speak very clearly and enunciate, because if I can't understand you, I can't.
Self-defeating.
Would you, are you comfortable letting us know that we're going too fast? Will you say clear or something? Are you okay with that?
And do you mind, or do you prefer if we sit or stand?
You can decide that amongst yourselves, whatever
Okay.
your
I just got this really comfortable chair. Yeah. All right. Let's get this show on the road. Resolved, the African Union should intervene in the Egypt crisis. Observation 1 is going to be resolution analysis. The definitions are going to be contextually defined by our plan text. However, it's important to understand that words have a multiplicity of meanings and understandings, and therefore no one definition should be prioritized over the other. What this means for the purpose of this round is that if the only reason you would vote on topicality and theory arguments if there's proven exclusion from the debate. The next argument is going to be the criteria. We would ask you to evaluate this round through the system of all-inclusive net benefits is best because it decreases judge intervention by allowing the debaters to decide the activity. This is necessary for the veneer of competitive equity. Without this veneer, debate would collapse, which would be bad for all critical movements and all the education that we get through the activity. Observation 2 is background. The African Union has an obligation because of the 1990 Convention on Landmines to remove all landmines in their proximity. The number 2 here is that Egypt is the most heavily mined country in the world. The third argument is next argument is the plan text. The African Union will intervene in the Egyptian crisis by using Gambian rats to remove landmines in Egypt. Once again, the African Union will intervene in the Egyptian crisis by using Gambian rats to remove landmines in Egypt. You guys got a plan text coming? Yeah. Question?
I was going to do enough plan text.
Okay. Next argument is going to be solvency. The argument here is that Gambian rats are perfectly suited for this. A little one is that the rats are better than dogs because they cost like $1,000 less per rat, or $10,000 less per rat to train than dogs. The next argument is that they're better than dogs because they're less expensive, therefore they're less likely to trigger a landmine and cause it to prematurely blow up. The next argument is that they have a proven success record. They have done this in Tanzania and Mozambique where they successfully removed landmines without incident. The third argument is that they have an amazing sense of smell, even better than dogs, so they're able to sniff out the explosives within the ordinance and go find them in order to guarantee that they're deactivated. The fourth argument is that they're best suited for the climate because they're Gambian rats, therefore the close proximity will mean that they'll be well suited and won't have any problems making the transition. The fifth argument is that two rats with 2 human handlers in 1 hour can cover 300 square meters and demine it. Question?
Yeah, where are these mines located in Egypt?
I'm going to get to that on the advantage.
Okay, cool.
What was that? Advantage 1 predictably is going to be mines. The 8 point is uniqueness. Like I've already told you, Egypt is the most heavily mined country in the world. Well, it's right there at Afghanistan, but there's a lot of mines in the country. The little one underneath here is the largest minefield in the world is in Egypt. It has 16 million mines, and it covers 600 acres of what should be cultivated land. However, it's not because of the mines that are preventing people from farming. It's called what?
El Alamein.
El Alamein is the name of the land area that's mined. Another question?
Yeah, when has the AU removed these landmines from a different country or Egypt before?
Like I told you in the solvency, they've successfully done this in Mozambique and Tanzania. Next argument is going to be that there's 8,000 deaths per year from landmines. Furthermore, there's 22 million landmines in the entire country, meaning that they could all be removed, hopefully by plan. The fourth argument is that 25% of the world's total landmines are in Egypt, which is shows the magnitude of the problem. Furthermore, just on okay, this is a 40-minute debate round we're having. Every 20 minutes, somebody dies in Egypt because of a landmine. That just shows how drastic this problem is. The B point is the plan. The plan is going to be sending Gambian rats in, which will solve for this. The internal link is you can cross-apply the solvency arguments about how they've historically worked, especially with African Union and specific theaters nearby. This means that we have a high propensity to solve for the vast majority of this death, if not all of them. The D point is going to be the impacts. Predictably, it's death. The victims of the current crisis are trying to leave the country, making this exasperating situation because we have refugees trying to leave, and the minefield is stopping them and presenting a danger to them. Furthermore, the amount of deaths that happen is not only the individuals who are killed, there's also people who are maimed, and their entire life is derailed by these horrible incidents. Furthermore, this contributes to the AIDS epidemic, because individuals who have to get blood transfusions are not necessarily given the cleanest blood because it's an emergency crisis, therefore AIDS is spread through this. This is another independent reason to vote for this advantage. The next argument is female prosecution. Like in Egypt, a large amount of women are responsible for gathering food and wood and stuff like that for fires and cooking. However, this is a problem because historically invading countries, specifically we're talking about Nazi Germany from World War II, which is where a lot of these ordinances are from, they plant them around wells and forests and areas that are going to be used by people in order to create massive casualties. So then females essentially have the option of going to do their household duties, or face prosecution from their family members, or risk dying in the woods of a landmine explosion. This is a unique reason that this plan helps solve for females' rights and females' quality of life in Egypt. Advantage 2. A point is uniqueness. Egypt is on the brink of a food crisis in the status quo. The little wonder is that food prices have increased by 25% in 2010. The next argument is that massive portion of the countries can't be mined because of landmines. This is the argument I'm making on the background. The next argument is that, open quotation, Egypt looks like Latin America's banana republics, but without the bananas. This is according to frontpagemagazine.com. This shows the fact that they are on the verge of a crisis. The B point is a link. The plan is going to solve for this because we're going to remove these mines. The C point is the internal link. The one here is that we're going to be able to increase arable land that's farmed, because in the status quo they're not able to farm based on the landmines being ever present. This is going to be stopped. This means that they have access to the 600,000 acres that are currently unable to be cultivated because of the massive amount of landmines. The C point is the next internal link is that Egypt is the most populated country in the Arab world, meaning that there's a massive amount of people who are going to need food, and the food stocks are just simply not there. Furthermore, food prices causes inflation, because when food becomes in short demand, food prices go up, which causes inflation throughout the economy. The D point is going to be the impact. The first argument is going to be starvation. If you don't have access to food, people die. It's the absolute worst way to die, because it eats your body from the inside. Essentially, your body metabolizes the muscle and the bones and until you die, along with your stomach acid. The next argument is going to be the Camp David Accords. However, if Egypt is collapsed into the state of food crisis, there's going to be the growing resentment of the Camp David Accords will boil over, and Egypt will withdraw from the Camp David Accords. The Camp David Accords are really important because they prevent war with Israel. The argument here is that the Camp David Accords ensure that Israel will have access to the Sinai Peninsula. In a world where you don't give them access to Sinai Peninsula, it will be viewed as Egypt reneging on a contract that's necessary to guarantee Israel's security. This means that Israel will push into the Sinai Peninsula and look to reassert itself here. However, Egypt has a strong military tradition, and it will not allow this to happen. So there will be a conflict between the two. Argument is that it's really bad because, historically, the conflict between Egypt and Israel has boiled over to the rest of the region. In a world where you have chemical weapons in Syria that are possibly loose, and you have Hezbollah looking for a fight with Israel, getting high-grade weapons, you're going to see that Israel's going to have no other option except to nuke one of their neighbors. This will be bad because it will block out the sun and lead to total extinction. The only way to avoid this is to vote for plan.
So what we're gonna do is, first we're gonna go off case.
How many?
2, 3, 4.
Okay, seeking advantages.
So more off case than the advantages.
Yeah, there you go.
Do you want a solvency background on stuff?
Yeah, we're gonna go all the way to the top. First thought case is going to be that of a topicality. The eighth one under this is that Egypt crisis, it includes the conflict between the government powers and the people. The second one is intervene means to become between the conflict. The violation under this is 1, they do not
Repeat that,
actually...
please.
Just the interpretation.
Both interps, please.
No. Anyways, I'm going to keep going. I wasn't...
Say
I need the
Any
interpretation.
interpretation is going to be that the
For
Egypt
Egypt crisis.
crisis needs to be a conflict between the government powers and the people. The second one is that intervene means to be you have to come between the conflict. The B point under this is going to be the violations. They do not absolutely go through the conflict between the government powers and the people. They actually go through landmines that were laid down in World War II. Alamein, that's the whole big point about it, is in World War II there were landmines laid down by Britain powers and World War II and the Nazi Axis powers. It has nothing to do with the Egyptian government whatsoever. The Egyptian government did not plant these mines. The second point is they're not intervening between this conflict between the government and the people. They're just simply removing landmines. This is missing it at a point. The first one's going to be political context. The A point of this is literature-based. When you look to the news, you're not talking about landmines in Egypt. We're talking about what's going on in Egypt, the fact that Egypt is tearing itself apart because the people are rioting against the government. The second one is the current usage. It talks about this police, basically current usage. We're talking about police brutality. We're talking about the government oppressing its people. We're not talking about landmines that are happening right now on the borders of Egypt. Alamein is actually, Alamein. Alamein not even in Egypt now. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The second one is going to be that predictable limits and clear boundaries. It's the fact that they're not actually giving us predictable limits or clear boundaries. We're not talking about where the AU actually intervenes within the government and the people. They're just simply saying that they're predicting landmines. And don't let them come up in the MO and simply say that, or let them come up in the MG and simply say that we're by removing landmines or coming between people and the government because people are no longer going to blame the government for these landmines. That's just trying to skew us out of grounds. Third one's going to be ground skew. You're going to see a ground skew that's going to be completely articulated views because we have a counterplan, advantage, and disadvantage to come between what happens when the AU intervenes between people, the government, and the population, not what happens when they do landmines. Third one's going to be that grammar. This is going to be making the most sense. When you look to the Egyptian crisis, when you look to actually what the grammar is supposed to say, the Egyptian crisis is a grammar term that is used to describe the current conflict between the government and its people. And so the impacts into this is going to be one, ground skew. It's the fact that we're going to show you articulated views on where they skew us out of ground. Second one is going to be a priori issue, and the reason to prefer this over anything else is going to be this is a pre-fiat issue. Whatever you vote in here, Judge, inside of the round, it's not going to happen in the real world. But if you vote for them because they're being unfair and it basically skews us out of this ground, that happens in real life. And when debaters simply see that debate's not fair because of what happens, debaters don't debate. It destroys debate. Let's go to counterplan. Counterplan is the U.S. federal government should stop aid to Egyptian government. The agency's U.S. federal government enforcing U.S. federal government timeline now. Solvency is that $1.5 billion in aid is given to the Egyptian government every year. The second one is that Obama pledges is going to be pledging another $450 million last month. The third point on this is that the aid goes straight to the corrupt politicians and military leaders. It's actually key to what keeps the Egyptian government going. The fourth one is that cutting aid will stop the fuel versus the states versus the citizen strike. It's basically going to stop the brutality. By cutting off the aid, you cut off the government's capabilities to keep brutalizing the civilians. The fifth one is this is going to allow civilians and political adversaries to be elected, basically having the citizens have a foothold. It's mutually exclusive because of the timeline. In a realistic situation, it takes the AU a long time before it's a conglomeration. It's just like the UN. They have to vote. They have to do this. This is a timeline now. If they say they're going to permit, they're going to sever out their timeline and instantly lose this debate.
Question?
What's the,
Avenge.
on the counterplan, the status?
It's unconditional.
Condition.
It's just articulated.
Advantage to counterplan. The advantage to counterplan is going to be the stop the brutality. A point is that police brutality is increasing amongst the Egyptian population. The second one is that people are backlashing against the police. This is creating a veritable cyclical civil war. The second one is this is going to be a perpetual cycle where it's just the government keeps beating down the people keep rising up, and it's just going to be a long-term civil war. The fourth one is that this aid goes to these corrupt leaders. The link is the fact that we stop and we cut off the aid. The secret under this is without this aid, the government no longer can be funding the police or funding the corrupt politicians that are creating these terrible laws. The second one underneath this is the fact that this is actually going to stop an institutional dehumanization, where the institution actually condones dehumanization. Under Egyptian constitution, 10% of the people who live in Egypt are non-Islam, but they are subjected to Sharia law. So they're being completely dehumanized within the system and the status quo. When this is going to stop, when the military, or when they no longer have aid for the police brutality and military aid, this is going to give the citizens a foothold to actually have a voice heard in the political sphere to be able to affect their government and see how this is. The D under this is going to be the impacts. This is actually going to, first off, it's going to stop the brutality of the police fighting. It's going to stop the riots. It's going to stop the deaths and the murders. It's going to stop the rapes that are happening in the streets, because when you have riots, when you have complete, total civil chaos, it's going to stop the rapes and the dehumanization of these people. So we're going to be saving from death, and we're going to be saving from the dehumanization of the people. Let's look to your disadvantage. Disadvantage number 2 is going to be AU title. The first point under this is going to be uniqueness of Libya. Libya has evolved into a huge civil conflict between, there's no end to it. It's just two factions that are fighting over control of it. The second one is due to the Côte d'Ivoire crisis, the violent protests have bursted into all at once, causing 100,000 refugees to be crossing the border, and has reported massive murders and massive graves. We actually have no numbers for how many people are being killed because it's that bad. It is that bad that the body count continues to increase more and more. The third one is the Democratic Republic of Congo. This conflict has been pulling 7 different nations into this actual conflict. So we're seeing massive amounts of deaths in Africa as well. The Sierra Leone has been levied with grotesque human rights violations. We can see that 50,000 people have already been killed, and it's going to be increasing by another 60,000 is the fact that they continue to have these grotesque human rights violations levied upon them. The fifth one is the conflict between Ethiopia and Eritrea is a 30-year war of independence. It's the fact that they're trying to fight for independence, but it's just a continuous war, it's a perpetual war. As you can see on that front, there's complete deaths. The sixth one is that in Rwanda, the genocide has been going on for years. It's just massive genocides in Rwanda. The viewpoint is that the plan ties up AU forces within Egypt. Not just clear minds, but within Egypt. This is where we're going to show articulated views, because they can simply delink out of the saying that we're just taking out mines, we could shift anywhere down. We plan for them going in either with military force or actual human aid, human resource aid. But they did not do that at all. The point underneath this is that Egypt will be a long-term tied-in process. It's the fact that it is most of the population, they're not going to be able to do this. The B point of this is that most of the population is riding. The C point is EU was only able to send 7,000 troops so far, so basically this is going to tie it up, and then without support, these acts of violence in Africa are going to continue. And to the advantage, and the AU has planned for 2010 to 2015 to systematically deal with these problems in Africa. The D point of this is the fact that this is actually, plan is going to cause massive amounts of death, because as you see through all of our uniquenesses, you have millions of deaths, millions of people being dehumanized right now, and instead this is going to completely outweigh on any of their impacts. Let's look to the advantage. First one, under their plan text, they just said they're going to use rats, solvency press. They didn't say they're actually going to be using people. Words are what are in debate. We can't go with what's intrinsically said, what is implied. So when the plan text says that they're going to be using rats to clear landmines, I know this is going to sound preposterous, but the only thing we attack here inside of debate is actually words. There's no solvency because they're actually not going to have boots on the ground. They're going to have rats. Now, according to all their advantages, you're going to be voting here on abuse because they're simply going to gain system.
Okay. What? Okay. So I want case on top, and then the topicality, and then I'll talk about the counterplan and finally the disadvantage. Okay. Ready to go? And if somehow I start going too fast, please just yell out for me. It's not my intention to do that. First, on our case, the first, I want you to flow through both the advantages. They don't make any attacks on it, so there's going to be reasons why we gain access to decreasing debt and increasing the amount of food and decreasing the propensity for a nuclear war, which is going to be, well, the nuclear war scenario might be slightly low probability. It is ginormous magnitude, but we definitely gain access to the solving for the starvation, which is always going to be a real war, like a real solvency that they completely concede. Now, they're on their solvency press. They say, oh, you're not using people. However, we're using, the plan text says by using Gambian rats. Gambian rats is a program through the APOPO, which basically uses rats combined with trainers. So it's the program itself. We're calling it by the program which is doing it. So the fact is that we're talking about the benefits of using rats. Additionally, though, solvency number 5, we specifically mention about how humans work with rats. 2 and 2 can cover 300 meters squared in an hour, which means that this is just crazy talk. Clearly we're talking about men. Humans. We're talking about humans working with rats. Also, they just throw out this idea of abuse on case, but they don't articulate how that happens or interacts with our case whatsoever, and we're going to beat that back on the off case, so it doesn't interact with case. You can still evaluate case against any other argumentation. Now, on the topicality, the first argument is that we meet because we intervene between the government. They say that we have to intervene, we have to come between the conflict of the people, the government and its people. We would argue that the government is currently using the mines against the people. The government is using these as a political tool. Yes, they're mines, but they're also by the fact that they're not acting, that is keeping the problems going on. We would argue that the military that is currently in charge is in favor of these mines and that we're coming in and intervening. Additionally, their only argument, they drop it down a little bit down. They say that don't let them say that the people blame the government. That's not our argument, so you can just ignore it. What we're saying is that the government is using the mines to oppress the people, so we are intervening. But we have a counterinterpretation that The Egyptian crisis is a term of art under the United Nations Development Project where the Egyptian crisis refers to the Egyptian Crisis Management and Recovery Program for mine removal. Once again, the counter-interpretation. The Egyptian crisis is a term of art that is within the United Nations Development Project where the Egyptian crisis refers to the Egyptian Crisis Management and Recovery Program for mine removal. So clearly we're within the bounds of that. This is going to be better because this is about like topic literature. Like clearly the Egyptian crisis, we should be dealing with what is actually referred to the Egyptian crisis by like governing bodies. At the point when there is no general consensus on what is the Egyptian crisis, you're going to have to look here to this definition where it's a term of art. Additionally, our counter standards would be, first of all, term of art, we have to use the word as it's generally understood, which means that we have to be able to apply that into the debate round. We'd also argue that this is going to be, the topic literature is going to be best because this is when we talk about Egyptian crisis, that's what we're talking about, where the third is going to be that this is actually the most predictable because Egyptian crisis, if we were to revert to their interpretation that Egyptian crisis is could mean anything, like what in the world, how do you define it? And the point that that's why you can look to the counter-interpretation. Also, we would argue that you're going to cross-apply Somerset's analysis of the top-up case, that unless they can prove exclusion, that is not a reason why you're going to have the violence against Somerset. You will silence his speech his speech act if you vote against him simply on this topicality. You're going to cross-apply that as a reason why you're not going to vote here. It's also a reason to prefer reasonability at the point when we're very reasonable and we're intervening in Egypt. Like, it's still good. Now, they say that this is a political context. We would argue, first of all, we meet, but also that that's not applicable. Like, Egyptian crisis is a too broad definition that would lead to over-limiting the resolution. Like, under their idea, Egyptian crisis could mean anything. Next, they say that this is current usage because of government oppression, but also we would argue that current usage, what the UN is talking about the Egyptian crisis, they're talking about this program, which means that what current usage are they talking about? There's no reason to prefer theirs over our current usage. Additionally, they say that this is predictable limits and grounds, but we would argue that that's not true because clearly we're predictable under our interpretation, and also you can still run your disads. There's no loss of ground at the point when we're still using the AU. You can use a whole bunch of ground about why those things are bad.
There's no one predictable act.
And there is no one predictable act. And think about it. Think of all the things you could do for intervening in an Egyptian crisis. That could be anything. They provide no warrants of what is predictable and no bright line, which is the reason why you're not going to prefer it. Then they say that this is some kind of a ground skew, but they provide no analysis at the point when they give a counterplan disadvantage and they get on the case. That's going to be a reason why you're not going to vote here because they haven't been skewed out of the round. They have offense. They have things against our case. Next argument they say is that the grammar, you have to look to grammar, but we would argue that the term of art would supersede grammar because you have to look at it in its total context of usage and not just its formation in a sentence. The next argument we would make, though, is that the grammar itself is oppressive and the way that it forces us to uniquely identify with their interpretations, and we need to be able to have freedom to express our own. Then they say this is an a priori voting issue. First of all, it's not. You can still evaluate our speech act for what we're advocating for is the ending of the deaths. We'd also argue that there's no ground skew, there's no loss of competitive equity, and they're not going to be able to prove abuse on the case or in the round. Now, on to the counterplan. First of all, it's going to be a perm because you can use Gambier match from. Hold on, where's our plan text? The African Union. Okay, first of all, you can do the perm. It's not mutually exclusive because it doesn't matter. Like in any world, even if we were military intervening in Egypt, the AU, we could still stop aid Egypt. By using different actors, it's not mutually exclusive, which is the reason why you're going to reject it. They say that it's mutually exclusive on a time frame argument. We would argue that this is bad for debate because overall, this you can still at the point when you can still do both. It's not a test of competition, and when they're functionally different things, when you can remove aid and intervene in any kind of definition that they would argue that's not going to be mutually exclusive, which is why you're not going to vote us down for it, which is why the permit's on. Additionally, we would argue that you wouldn't want the perm anyway. They say that severance is bad, they don't explain that or why that's going to be bad. Also, on the disadvantage of the counterplan.
Camp David Accords, basically we pay Egypt military aid and they don't.
You're going to look specifically to the advantage 2 scenario about how Camp David Accords would fall apart, where we're going to be at the point, the Camp David Accords came about because we promised Egypt aid at the point if they didn't attack Israel. So when we're ending that aid, we're going to see that we actually realize advantage 2. Advantage 2 is a straight disadvantage to the counterplan, a reason why you won't prefer it. Now, under the net benefit specifically, they argue that they're going to be able to stop violence and they're fighting, that they're going to, there's long-term criminal war, but we would argue that this is not really what's going on. It's not currently, there's not civil war, there isn't like, the riots aren't violent, and we would argue that they have no warrants for the rape that's going on currently that's somehow unique to the riots. We would argue that currently it's peaceful protest and that they just want democracy, but there's no real risk to having it, where you would see real risk by voting for the counterplan, because it is an access advantage too, and it also then resolves to the mines. Now, okay, we would also turn it by saying that at the point when we can, like, mine removal would actually be better for ending the Egyptian crisis, because we would able to, like, it would undermine the military government right now and lead to peace. Now, on to this advantage. First of all of their uniqueness is not, their uniqueness is the wrong way. They're talking about how all the violence is occurring now, and then they say that like, you're removing troops. Well, the troops weren't solving the violence anyway, so at the point, like, if even in a world where we're stealing a lot of troops, there is absolutely no risk to this disadvantage. Like, they don't explain how it's somehow going to get worse, and at the point when the Rwanda genocide, the Ethiopia conflict, the Sierra Leone, the Cook of the Everyday, like, all of those problems, they still exist in the status quo. They're not made worse by plans, so it's not a reason to reject it. This is also not an abuse claim, because it's just a poorly written dissent at the point when it's like terminally non-unique. At the point when all these things are happening, it's not a reason why we reject any plan, because any plan that sold troops, like, okay, the troops weren't effective. And the most important argument is this is a linked turn, because not only our plan and the answer to the abuse claim that they're going to go, any plan where the AU successfully intervened in case would cause, like, legitimacy and would allow them to, like, work against the disadvantage, all those uniqueness.
Same word. That's okay. On topicality, my first response there, we meet on our interpretation, is that they, first of all, articulated their meeting this interpretation is because the mines are used by the Egyptian government as a tool to oppress the Egyptian citizens. My first response to this is no oppression. They did not show how these mines are actually used by the Egyptian government to actually oppress the people. My second response is that of no government control. The current state of the Egyptian government has actually no influence over the control of these mines. These mines are actually just leftover remnants of World War II, and they're not using these mines in a strategic manner to actually oppress the people. And three, these people are not complaining about these mines. The people are currently right now, the political context of this interpretation is that they are complaining about how the government is beating them back and using tear gas and other forms of police brutality in the streets of their big cities, and they're trying to express their voice against the current direction of their political institutions in Egypt with the takeover of the Muslim Brotherhood in their government. So that is how they do not meet our interpretation. On their counter-interpretation, one, please reject this counter-interpretation. It is because of our standards. If you look to our standards, you can see how our standards uphold our interpretation, but our standards do not uphold their counter-interpretation. The only standard they put under their counter-interpretation is that of reasonability. They say this is reasonable because it's the UN. But that does not show how it conflicts with our political context, where we say that the literature base and the news sources that we use as preparation and use for predictability to see what they're going to run, there's no talk of the United Nations project development, that long name they have for mine removal. That little attachment, mine removal, is so hyper-specific and so far parametricized, it doesn't give the negative team any ground. And that's a reason why you should look to their counter-interpretation to vote for the negative team. The counter-interpretation is far too parametricized and does not allow us to access any ground from the literature base. So looking to our standards, their first counter-standard, once again, was reasonable. But once again, the most reasonable counter-interpretation of this is one that provides, that comes from the political context, that provides good grammar, that shows good grammar, it also shows good ground division, that there's no ground skewing. So to reject their standard on reasonability. On to the first standard of political context, they said that they met it. Second of all, deny this, because one, they have not shown how anywhere in the news or how there's any political talk of enforcing their plan. There's no literature on actually using the AU to come and do mine removal. That's just not talk. What the talk is about right now is actually trying to decide whether or not forces should go in, peacekeeping forces should go into the Egypt conflict. And they don't show how actually there's a conflict between the people and the government and their plan, and also they don't show how they're intervening. Because our definition of intervene, we said come between the conflict. Once again, this doesn't come between the conflict. It's trying to solve the conflict, but it's not getting between the people and the government. And what our counter plan shows is actually we actually effectively, that's our TPP, so I'll get to that at the bottom. What's your point?
Under when they said that they're most predictable, just simply, Just be honest, just ask the judge, when she heard Egypt
Yeah,
conflict,
yeah,
did
yeah.
you think mine?
Yeah, on this resolution, like anybody who's been following the news recently and looking to, when considering this resolution, out of all the array of different plans you can do, like using the UN as an actor, using the United States, and all the different actions you can do, like cutting off aid, sending in troops, none of this little idea of using this rat organization to take out these mines. It's so parametricized and unfair to us. It's very abused. So please flow through our standards how actually grammar for the word intervene shows that we're actually coming in between the people and the government by removing by not using military action. They don't do that, which they should do. And they didn't. We meet grammar, or do they show how there's grammar? On their point about there's no predictability, there's no one predictable case. Once again, from the literature base, we have tons of predictable cases that they could have done. Instead, they chose one that's not known and not well known. It's not current. And it's not a political issue. I'll get to the bottom of this topicality. So onto the impacts. We still have shown a ground skew because of our unlinking counterplan and disadvantage and advantage. And also on the a priori issue, they do not show how they are actually being fair and actually recover this ground for us. And in fact, if you look to the permutation, they can see when they perm our counterplan, this fuels our topicality argument. The fact that they use this permutation shows how we're being abused right now because they can actually do it. If in a real round, they couldn't perm our counterplan would be mutually exclusive with their real plan that they should have had. Now, what's your question?
How is the U.S. ending aid and what you thought we should have run mutually exclusive?
Well, we don't know.
What are the cases?
We predicted that you would do something with with sending troops, and that's what we thought by the word intervene, and that was the most predictable definition. And
Not just sending troops like foreign aid, stuff like that.
yeah, sending foreign aid. And our top, we made the bet that that you guys were going to do something militarily, and we decided to do aid instead. So, but that's regardless of the point. The point is that they don't have. They have not given us fair ground by parametricizing this small issue, and they've skewed us out of all our prep time, which is very abusive. They've made my partner's speech basically non-effective, except for this T argument. So please look to this issue for all the other issues. They talked about how you can still look to saving lives via their plan. Once again, the real world impact here is us as debaters. This activity, the purpose of this activity is to grow students, to increase education for us, to get refine us in our skills and articulation, and debaters will leave the activity if they feel like the activities no longer has any standards for fairness anymore. So please vote there.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Just when they say the term of art supersedes grammar and grammar is oppressive, simply just say that, look, when we look into grammar,
Yeah, I got that on the counter-interpretation when they said that this is the UN, this is our term in the UN name, but once again, that's parametricizing. It's not a real grammar standard. Okay, so let's go to the disadvantage. Now actually on the counter the advantage, once again, their terms on here don't really apply because in the world of debate, these are just articulated abuse. They can't use our advantages because they don't link into their case, and actually you can see the fact that they can turn it so well is why it feels hard to articulate abuse. Also onto the disadvantage, they said that they turned our uniqueness and then they tried to do a link turn on our disadvantage of how taking the AU away from the Ethiopian nations and using them in Egypt was going. Can you help with the?
Yeah, basically what they're saying here, like they're saying that it's terminally non-unique because what we're trying to show you is a scenario about how bad. Yeah, they're saying that look, mine room was going to be better because. Dude, basically just hit the.
Okay, yeah. So on the turn, on the link turn, once again, they don't show how our direction of our internal links to our impact is actually garnered by their plan. We actually show that taking away the AU focus off the Ethiopian conflict is actually going to be hurting them because the AU is not a strong force. They only send small bodies of forces, and by moving them to Egypt and away from the EU, you're going to see the conflict between the Ethiopians and the surrounding countries are going to be hurt. You're going to see the loss of human lives there as the AU leaves those areas to Egypt, and so we still can access our impacts there. It's not mutually exclusive. And so for these reasons, most importantly, the topicality, please vote aye. Thank you. Negative. Thank you.
So it's just going to be T, and then kind of finding disadvantages for articulated things as well. This is why you're filling out a ballot for MJC. Look, the affirmative team is being completely abusive when it comes to this round judge. First off, flow across all what my partner says, right? Now, when you look to this T and you look to the cases abroad, when you first heard the resolution, what was the first thing that went through your mind? Was it, we should use rats to clear mines? No, it was not. It was, hey, there's a civil war going on right now in Egypt. They need to intervene. Look to where my partner says that in their counter-interpretation, they're being exclusive to us, where they're locking us into ground. This shows ground abuse. With their counter-interpretation, they're locking us into ground with their term of art, using that as in the UN. We're using a every man's political base. When you look to
Point
the
of order. I'm sorry, I was a little slow on this.
Yeah.
Any analysis that our counter-interpretation is also abusive is new and should have been made in the MO.
My partner Dan stated that ultra-parameterization is bad in like 4 different arguments, and so I'm just extending his analysis. Ultra-parameterization is bad. He also did on the counter-standard as well, or counter-interpretation. Wait, okay, cool. So basically, they're locking us in the ground. There's one case of articulated abuse right then and there when the AF team tries to come up there and use a lot of debate jargon to lock us into ground, saying terms of art and things like that. Now let's look to the fact of political context. We're winning on this standard, Judge, because when you're looking to political context, you're looking to what the news says, what CNN says. When you turn on the TV, what do they say? They're saying Egypt's going up in flames because civilians are fighting the police. They're not saying Egyptians are dying because there's mines. Look to where my partner says that these mines, first off, there is no oppression. They show no oppression. 2, the government has no control over these mines. I say in my first LO, these mines were left over from World War II. The government did not do it. And the second one is they're not intervening at all because they're not intervening between the government and the people. They can just simply try to put up this counter standard and counter interpretations that try to lock us into ground. Look, reject this because look, we are the most reasonable team. We are. We went with a reasonable disadvantage that shows what happens when the AU gets locked up in an Egyptian conflict. They are being unreasonable because they're talking about using rats to clear mines. And as you can see in case, it's an easy win if you don't look at this team because they just simply dance around the fact. There's like D-link here, we're going to burn the counter plan. Because we're going to put
any argumentation that we have delinked the disadvantage is new. First of all, it's not true, but also it's new in the LO. It should have been made in the MO.
This is simply just voters on why you should vote them down. Okay, cool. I don't know whether or not to talk. Okay, so simply saying we delink, we case turn here, we case turn there, because our disadvantage can show no real traction on their case because they're talking about rats in Egypt clearing mines, not about the civil unrest. Look to the fact that we need to be talking about what the AU is doing in Egypt. And look to the fact that this permit is going to superfuel our articulated abuse. The fact that they can permit is so easy because their plan is extremely untopical. Because we're saying that in America, yeah, you can perm 2 untopical plans. It's really easy to do it. You're just like, we can do this and this. When you have a topical plan, when we show you it's mutually exclusive through a timeline that the EU has to take a long time, and I said this in ALO, and the EU takes a long time to do this since it's severance from timeline, and they simply say, no, it's not a severance from timeline, because the AU can do this, and we can also do it in America. That proves that they're being untopical as well, Judge, because they're simply not doing it. Look, they're saying that we don't need ground.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Argumentation that the time frame is abusive is new. They argue that it's severance in the LOC, but that now it's changed to abuse, and that should be.
In my LO, I stated that they cannot perm because of timeline. Then in the MO, my partner Dan states that look at the perm, it's a reason for our articulated abuse. I'm extending my partner's analysis on how the perm is extended abuse and using a voter to show you where to vote. The abuse argument. Okay, that's fine. Even if you don't buy the counterplan abuse argument, you can also see that the fact that when my partner says that the perm is an articulated abuse, it shows enough. But even if you don't look to the counterplan, look to the disadvantage. That is a clear showing of the articulated abuse in the ground skew. We're also winning on the fact of grammar. When they say that there's no predictable app and things like that, we look to predictability and reasonability, right? They counter their reasonability. When my partner says ultra-parameterization is bad, they actually contradict themselves by saying that we get more ground, but yet we also, basically they're saying that there's no predictable outcome for being the most reasonable on the team. So that's simply showing where they're contradicting each other. This is where they're being untopical. The fact is, Judge, they're just trying to spread us across the flow and trying to mask up their mistakes. Anything you want me to hit on this real quick? Anything at all? So basically, Judge, when you're looking at this, it is a 3-5 issue. So just forget that debate term. Look at them as a whole. Look at the AF team. When they talk about rats clearing mines, that's not an Egyptian crisis. They're talking about the UN, right? That's what's in the UN plan text. I'm not part of the UN. I looked on to the news, I looked on CNN, I looked on Cato, I looked on The Economist. It's
Point of
all
order.
talk.
I'm sorry, analysis that he is not the UN, and that somehow he doesn't like fit within this UN definition is new, it should have been made in the EMO.
Okay, Judge, that's emotional flair. You know I'm not part of the UN. I mean, if I was, I wouldn't be here. I'd be busy working on the Egyptian conflict, which is between the government and its people.
I don't know, there's an argument.
It's just
Emotional fire.
It's just emotional flair. Come on, guys. I got 2 seconds though, so here we go. Because of being unfair and they're showing that ground scoop, you're going to be voting negative.
All right. For a roadmap, I would like to talk about the disadvantage and then the counter plan, and then the top of case resolution analysis stuff in the first speech, and then the topicality. Cool. The opposition team claims that the disadvantage and how we defeated it was based on our non-topical plan. I don't think this is very true. Look at Mitchell's analysis. We're going to extend the argument that their troops are not solving any of these crises, so they have no uniqueness. This is not abuse. This is just a bad disadvantage. There's no reason we should be punished because they read their uniqueness the wrong way. I don't think you're voting on the abuse based on the disadvantage. Furthermore, they claim that the link turn is abuse. However, our link turn is basically we use the AU to do something good, therefore we increase legitimacy. Any AU action, we could have claimed that on. I mean, it's not unique abuse in this case. This is just reasons that their disadvantage is not good. Okay, look to the counter plan. Once again, they claim this is abuse. They say you should vote on T because we permed their counter plan. There's no reason. I asked them at a point of information, how is it that the U.S. stopping aid would be competitive with anything? And they gave you no reason. And they say it's a time frame reason, but there's no reason that the United States cannot stop aid while the African Union decreases mines or does any of the topical affirmatives that they think we should have run. There's no reason that this is abuse. They say that, and once again, the point of order also was relevant to that. Anything else on this? Oh yeah. I also looked at the disadvantage on the counter plan. On the counter plan. We ran a disadvantage to your counter plan. That's defeating the counter plan without using any of our negative, abusive case. We're beating them because stopping aid to Egypt is a horrible idea, not because our affirmative case. We don't need the affirmative case to beat this disadvantage. Or this counter plan. It's just a bad one. It would cause nuclear war. They're conceding that argument, meaning it's true. So there's no articulated abuse in this round. Now let's go to the topic case. I want you to look to where I say that judge intervention is the worst thing in this round because it destroys debate. They're not answering this argument. That's not really problematic until the member of opposition speech where they say, you as a judge need a gut check and think of what you said and thought in your mind when this happened. They are asking you to intervene, which we have highlighted and they have conceded as the biggest impact that will necessarily collapse debate. Just for these reasons alone, without me even going to the topicality flow, you cannot vote for the topicality. Let's go there now. I don't think their line by line is good enough for them to win this. They say we don't meet, fine, we don't meet your definition. However, our counter-interpretation is a better definition, so we're going to win that. Your counter-interpretation, you guys say you should be rejected because of the op standards. However, we're winning counter-standards as to why our interpretation is good, and we're subsuming your opposition standards, so there's no reason this argument is important. They say it's too parametricized. There's never an impact in parametrization. Furthermore, the resolution allows for all sorts of affirmatives, and there's no reason that this affirmative is too, they don't give you a bright line or any explanation of that. Also, they say that Mitchell's third counter standard is that our affirmative is the most predictable based on the UN literature base. Their response to this is, you must gut check this argument. Now, I don't think the gut check is a good argument. I think you should disregard it based on the judge intervention arguments we're reading in this round. When you disregard it, you can extend the argument that our affirmative is the most predictable because it's based on UN literature. This is essentially a conceded argument that should have been 5-pointed in the block if you guys wanted to win topicality. The next argument I want to go for is cross-apply, or extend the cross-application Mitchell makes that words have a multiplicity of meanings and understandings, and therefore you would only vote on topicality if they prove an exclusion. I think that my argumentation on the disadvantage in the counterplan proves that there's no exclusion in this round. We just had a better, or opposition strategy was insufficient to beat our case, regardless of this. Also, extend that it's the current usage in the UN. This is our warrant for predictability. Also, extend reasonability. The response to this is political based, but I think when we're winning the argument on the multiplicity of meanings and the fact that it's most predictable, there's no reason you're going to default to political context. On their political context and grammar, Mitchell tells you that our counter-interpretation assumes or usurps your grammar arguments because it's actually it's grammatically correct and we have a term of art. Furthermore, we're giving you a source on our interpretation where they're just asserting what this means. opinions based on what they happen to read in the news. There's no reason that you should prefer what they read in the news based on what we read in the news. Maybe Mitchell and I like to discuss UN policy and history because I'm a history major and he's an economist, and maybe that's what we like to do and not read the news. There's no reason that you're going to prefer what they saw in the news this morning as opposed to what there is in the literature base as a whole, which is the UN has a definition for this that we found.
The idea that the news is not, the literature base and the news is not a good standard is this is the first time they said it's not a good standard because we can't all read the same news.
I couldn't hear all that.
This is the first time you're attacking our political context standard as reading the news is not a good standard. Your first response was that you met it and that was it.
Right. Our first response is that our counterinterpretation meets this, but also we're saying that you should prefer our literature base and the term of art as opposed to your political context. The term of art versus the political context debate is what I'm talking about here. We're saying the term of art, the literature on that is important, and they're saying political context, and now I'm evaluating these two arguments and trying to weigh them. Okay. I have a minute left. Here's an interesting argument out of the MO. We made a bet. Look for your flow. That's on there, I'm sure. We made a bet. That's what the negative team is doing here. They're trying to pigeonhole us into an affirmative that they wanted us to run. Apparently, there was some really bad affirmative they were hoping we ran, and we didn't run it. They made the bet that we were going to do military intervention that used all the EU troops and sucked them out of every other country or something. However, I think that this is indicative of the problem with this topicality, that they made a bet on what we were going to run, and we didn't run that. That's not our fault. We are within the topic. We have a counterinterpretation that's based in the literature. It's actually warranted, and they don't. For all these reasons, I don't think you can vote on topicality. Furthermore, look at like the grammar is oppressive. Like, I don't think it's the best argument, but it's entirely conceded that their use of grammar is oppressive, and like we also are able to access their grammar arguments, and our field art is more. Term of art is more specific to the education in this debate as opposed to what happened on the news today. I think we're going to beat the political context with the term of art. When you see that you don't vote for the topicality extend across all the advantages of case and why case solves for nuclear war and death from landmines, I think this is why you're voting for UNR. We're topical and we solve the F.
Thank you all for coming out today. I'm not going to get this closed just because there's a lot of information and I need to look at my phone a little bit more before I can make a decision. I think both sides did a really strong argument. It got very technical in there, and both teams really ensured an understanding and an ability to actually argue the topicality point in particular. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a whole lot of specific feedback. I don't think anyone did anything immediately obvious that I will continue, like, you shouldn't have done that or anything. I think it was very close, very evenly matched debate. And well, so that's a great tournament.
Good debate, guys.
Cut my legs off.
See you guys outside.
Set this down.
Oh yeah, I'm just going to get my stuff.
You want to take it out? Take your stuff?
Are we going to leave it here?
Oh,
I think it's lunchtime now, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think we should leave this stuff here.